In the shadows of society, where silence often shields the harsh realities, acts of violence against individuals emerge as a harrowing testament to human suffering. These violence acts are not mere statistics. They are the silent screams of those who have been wronged, the broken echoes of lives shattered by cruelty. It was in response to addressing these acts of cruelty that the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act 2015 was enacted by the National Assembly and assented to become law by President Goodluck Jonathan in 2015. The VAP Act was enacted as a result of many gender-based violence and human rights abuses in the country, including rape, maiming of spouses, forceful ejection from home, forced isolation, acid bath, and killing. Despite this legislation, issues around human rights violations persist. For the month of June 2024, the Human Rights Commission reported 106,604 complaints of human rights abuses, with child rights as a critical factor. Data obtained from the National Gender-Based Violence Dashboard also shows that at least 6,142 gender-based violence cases, which include sexual, physical, and psychological abuses, were reported in various Nigerian states between January and May. Apparently, combating these injustices involves a multifaceted approach, intertwining legislation, community support, and a profound cultural shift. On this episode of Nigeria Today, we shall be discussing violence against persons. I am your carrier, Clinton. Thanks for joining us. Now, with me in the studio to discuss violence against persons is Stanley Ekpa. He is a human rights lawyer. You're welcome to Nigeria Today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, also joining us via Zoom is Obi. She is the Country Director, Action Aid. It's good to have you on Nigeria Today, Ene.
Thank you very much. Former Country Director for Action Aid, please.
Sorry for that mix-up. Now, I'll start with you, Ene. What are the most, I know we've outlined some of these, violence cases. Now, what are the most common forms of violence individuals face today, and how prevalent are these acts? Okay,
you have, the issues of based violence, but they, is a commemoration of the international of violence due to their religious belief, and so what you find in this environment is different from where you have, the issues of domestic violence. You have a gender cuts across, and you have the law that you have already read. I think the gender-based is much common. We do, however, have cases of violence due to religious belief, and I think that is what today is. It's of marking. I won't say celebrate, because we have the human rights with the freedom that is contained in every constitution that I know around the world. And according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it talks about, of course, Article 20 tells us about every human being free, that all of us are equal. And I think the common nature of this environment tells us that when you are born tabula rasa. That is free from every knowledge about whatever is going on in the world. If a child is given birth to in a home to Buddhist parents, the child becomes, it depends on the parents. What they tell the child is what the child becomes. And then you have, if you are a Muslim, in a Muslim family, when the child is born, naturally it just comes to religion that the parents have given in a Christian home. So me and you, whichever home that we are giving birth to, and we come in, it comes naturally. And children, as they are growing up, should be held responsible because of what they think and all. So it's a difficulty, and I think adults sometimes create the problem, for the society, because or naturally they too were given when they were born, those things come along. And so I think that, aside from the case of, I think a case of Mubarak, who was sometime arrested some years ago, in a case of religion, because he doesn't want to belong to the religion that he was anymore, and so it comes it comes out of he was being prosecuted. I don't know how that case has gone, but that's one of the typical cases that I can see in Nigeria, because he wants to be a humanist. We need to look at, even when we are looking at religion as well, we need to look at the religion before Christianity and Islam came into Africa, for example, or came into Nigeria. Our people were traditional, or is it, I don't know what to say, whether it's idol worshippers, because if you look at our languages, all of them call God. There is a deity that they worship in different ethnic groups. They have their languages and all of that, and now new religion comes, and then there's discrimination. It's what one is seeking for or looking at is freedom from violence, freedom to enjoy, what to have your full rights as a human being.
Okay, and as much as we want to we understand what you're trying to say. Today's the UN is marking violence against person in terms of their religion and belief. However, we're looking at the prevalence of violence against individuals holistically in our country today. We're trying not to so much focus on this belief and religion, but let us look at it holistically, as it also affects other areas of the individual life. Now, to you, Ekpa, let's look at some of these. You had what I just said about our topic tonight. Now, in your own view, why do you think that acts of violence against individuals are on the rise in our society?
Thank you very much. I think there are reasons why acts against individuals, violence against individuals are on the rise. If you look at it from the points, for instance, like cultural points or standpoints, we, as the co-guests have rightly mentioned initially, if you look at the fact that in our climate, people are trained or raised in ways that they are meant to obey or follow cultural conditionings. That is to say that there are cultural practices that give prevalence to or prevent free expression of people's confidence, to either comfort to express their concerns in places where they've been abused. Because if you look at issues of violence against persons, it's not just about physical, their psychological, their economic, their mental abuse and all that. So it's not a one-way stream, issue. If you look at the act itself, you also realize the fact that the act, has broad-based avenues and channels for persons beyond the complainant, the victim now, or even the parents, to comfort and lodge complaints in circumstances where there are reports or the crime or an intention to commit the crime. So, but in the case where there are prevailing cultural conditions that prevent people to report such issues, it becomes very, very difficult. I also think that the second issue is institutional structural systems that we have in place. The primary places within the Act, within the framework of the Act, to which individuals, other victims, or persons who are privy to such violence can report is to the police or lodge a complaint in the court, right? The question is how free is the police station, how welcoming is the police station for people to lodge their complaints, and their complaints will be taken in manners that are not compromising, in manners that are also, in respect of human dignity and all that. Because when someone is willing to open up that have been violated in a certain way, the person's privacy, the person's right of human dignity are things that the institutions that are responsible for prosecuting or ensuring that there are remedies for the victim must provide a conducive environment for people to come forth really and lodge such complaint. But I think that is the only way to which, if we have institutional, we have cultural, because cultural includes also environmental in the family as well, that we begin to understand that we are at a particular point in the world, where the rights of human beings is the reason for why the state exists in itself. Because if you even within the construct of the Constitution creates 2 different chapters that are aligned to the issues that affects that directly or indirectly violence against person. If you look at chapter 4, the nature of chapter 4 itself, economic issue, the rights and the economic development, and you're tying it to chapter 4, you realize the fact that the construct of the Constitution, which gives rights, to our existence as a country, really is actually drawn to ensure that the rights of persons against, violence in different forms are being protected, really. But the institution itself must make sure that there's a created conducive environment for such cases when reported or when noticed or when there's a complaint. The attention is being given to it, and the right of persons complaining is being protected as well.
Okay, now back to you, Ene. When Stanley was talking earlier, he mentioned some types of violence. Oftentimes, we just limit it to physical violence. Some persons will tell you when when they are going through one thing or the other. Even some family members will say, "Did he hit you, or did she hit you?" They just limit it to that. So, talk to us about different types of violence, that people go through, and how significant it is, or how important it is for people to know these types of violence and how to, try to avoid them.
I think you have one of the ones that everybody can feel is the physical violence. A lot of people look at physical violence as a major one, but they can, you have psychosocial violence. You have in a home, for example, because you say it relates to individuals. In a home, you can have somebody in the house doesn't want to talk to you. The demeaning of some other person, looking at their self-confidence, the issue of dehumanizing someone, depending on the way you relate to that person. You can even be in the house. So it can come from spouses, for example. It can also come from friends. It can come from in-laws, both on the other side, whether you're male or female. We have to also understand that violence is not only against women. It is on the increase because women in the home, men more or less have higher powers, because in the African environment, the husbands are usually older than the wives. So you find a lot of violence that comes from that. So on the higher side, you have more violence, against women. But we have to also acknowledge the fact that there is also violence against men. There is violence against children, both boys and girls, vice versa. And the psychosocial violence is the most intimidating, and that is the one that leads to a lot of people, even within a home. You find either children or partners committing suicide, or one way or the other. Those who cannot contain it anymore, will step out. You also find out that when this violence comes, if it's for a couple, for example, the community and the family are almost against the person. You are not supposed to complain. You are supposed to have a thick skin to take it all in. And sometimes people go into depression, and a lot of things happen in this environment. And so it's important for you to notice those who are around you, what they are going through. And it can even be in a home where you have either those who are within the home with the children at home. The children are undergoing, going through violence, and you will not be able to know, because many of us are working and we are busy and we are not able to connect with our children for them to tell. So a lot of violence can also go on at home, in the community, depending on the class of people that you also meet with, in different environments. So I want to say that there is a lot of pain that goes on, within and around, all individuals, different individuals. But the state has, of course, the state has the obligation to protect every citizen from violence and from also all the other acts. Like, everyone was mentioning that when there are violence around, even if it's sexual harassment and so on, if you go to the police, are they ready? Are they ready to even tackle your case as you bring it on board? But I can say that we are not where we are yet, but we have come a long way. Gone are the days when you go and mention the issue, I won't say gone are the days, but a lot of, to a certain degree, we now have gender, deaths in many of the police stations, and also police headquarters and so on and so forth, for people to be able to lay their complaints. Before now, you take a case between a husband and wife, or between boyfriend and girlfriend, or even the case of assault to women, you go to the police will look at you and say, did you not enjoy it? And they will demean you in the course of all of that. So it's very difficult for them for women to get justice. The art of proving the violence is even more taller than what we're just looking at. So it's good to look at violence not in the surface of it.
Now back to you, Stanley. As much as we talk of violence, what are some of the underlying factors, the triggers to these acts of violence? And of course, how can it be addressed?
Thank you very much. I think I would want to join to say that if you look at the act of violence in its broad base, because the act actually provides for a large spectrum of spaces or layers to which this act can actually be committed. In fact, if we want to follow the act squarely, you realize the fact that we have to begin to look at even issues within social media space. So I think it's section 28 or so that talks about issue that has to do with indecent exposure. If you take that section, for instance, and you look at the intendment of that clause, I mean, and I agree, the act itself is one of the most gender inclusive laws I've seen. It is not about any gender, really. It's specifically about those things that triggers how people respond or react or behave to one another, really. And I'll take the section the offense I mentioned now, which is the offense of indecent exposure. I'm saying this because I think we have to look at it broadly as the act really intends that it should be looked at. The act says that if someone dresses in a way that it causes another person to look in a particular way, or tempt somebody to do something the person is not to do, male or female, that person, is if found guilty, is liable for an offense of an indecent exposure. Now, if you look at it from the fact that I'm talking about a generation that is growing up, a generation that the issue of mental health, there are a lot of issues of economic dignity, there are a lot of issues that they face, right? Then you realize the fact that there are so many things that trigger violence against human person that it just not that can just only be aligned to issues of domestic violence or spousal battery, as someone was trying to say. There are so many underlying factors, but it depends on which aspects of violence you are looking at. If it is acts or offenses or issues that relates to psychological issues, mental issues, then you begin to understand, you begin to take perhaps most of the things that people don't even take serious, comment people make online, because the law also talks about stalking as a violence against person. Laying the broad spectrum of what the intendment of the Violence Against Persons Act, Against Persons Prohibition Act intends violence to mean in the context to which we should look at it. There are so many factors, there are so many things that trigger or prompt behaviors that affects the dignity of one person or violates somebody's right as a person. But I think it's important that we look at it from the broad spectrum to which the offenses are meant to cover. By so doing, we begin to look at the underlying fact, the currency to which that gives rise to the violence itself.
Now, back to you, Ene. Now, we want to look at some of the steps We've known these issues, they are there. We cannot deny as a country that there's still a lot to be done, even though a lot has been done. Now, what proactive steps can individuals, communities, the government take to reduce the risk of violence against persons?
I think we need to recognize the fact that things are not what they used to be, that you are no longer, there is almost no safe space anymore. We have a lot of women and girls and also other people who are now internally displaced within our country and in different parts of the world. So living a life in that kind of environment is violence itself. So many people are being violated. And so how do they really manage in this environment? We have, the issues of climate change that reduces people to refugee status in just like overnight. You have also, cross-border, you have a lot of migration going on. People are migrating across the border because of one reason or the other, because of especially conflicts. And so there's a lot of violence that is going on. We still have the issue of, you remember the case of you remember the case of the Chibok girls? You remember the case of Leah Shoaibu? What is happening? They are still in captivity. You remember that's a level of violence that you cannot even comprehend because of, parents and so on. Yes, we may not have been able to get there, but there is a lot that communities can do. The community themselves, they can be a problem. Many of them are problems. I remember we had a case in one of the states we're working. We had a case of a little girl who was raped. It's an 8-year-old girl. She was raped. And then, one of the things is the onus on the burden of proof. You cannot just take the child, or you as a woman being violated, you cannot just go to any hospital. There are designated government hospitals, and these hospitals are so far away from the local government environment. But even with that particular case, they took the girl to the designated hospital. The lady in question, the nurse, had been tipped by someone else, and the nurse refused to examine this lady so that they can collect the evidence. And then they took the child to a private hospital. Some people followed her there. But a dedicated journalist decided and used camera to collect evidence of this child and saved it. But before the person knew what was happening, the community had rounded up the place and said, unless you bring your phone, we will visit that phone, you will not leave this place alive. And the journalist had to delete the evidence. What that means is that the community that ought to defend the child, raising children is a community responsibility. The community has also forgotten. And in many cases where women were violated, you find out that it's the community that will plead with the woman so that they release the man who perpetrated the whatever violence that happened, and so that they can make peace at home. But it's not, if you step into the shoe of the person who committed the violence, then of being a victim. If you go into the shoe of the victim, then you know that what we are talking about is a very, very serious thing. Every human is a responsibility of the government and of the community. We need to be able to protect everybody on equal basis, no matter who they are.
Thank you. And now, Stanley, just in 30 seconds. Now, what hope or advice can you offer to those who may be struggling after experiencing, violence?
I think the starting point is to understand that the law exists because of you. Mm-hmm. And there are different channels to which you can express your pain as a result of the violence committed against you, or the crime or offense committed against you. Mm-hmm. But for you to do that, I think it's also important for you to put yourself in a position where you understand the fact that you were not the one who actually committed the act. The act was committed against you. There's no shame in coming out, to seek for remedies, to seek for how best your rights can be protected within the law. The first place I think we have to start is a victim going to the right institution, to the police station, I understand that they fear that the police will most likely not be our friends and may not do their job. But I think it's best that you take the bold step of reporting the matter to the right authority. However, you know, as I said earlier, this issue is very broad. It's beyond the narrow way of just the domestic or for. If you are the act itself, for instance, provide for places for teachers in schools. Okay. So I think because that is an area to which we're not looking at pupils and students in schools where you know they don't know have the boldness.
Thank you very much, Stanley. Thank you so much, Stanley. Thank you very much for that. And that's where we draw the curtain in today's episode of Nigeria Today. A very big thank you to Stanley Ekpa, human rights lawyer, for his contribution and his time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that.
And also we had via Zoom where we have NOB, the former country director, Action Aid. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you.
And thank you for being part of the program. I'm Ikaria Clinton. Goodbye.